Hello, you guys, and welcome to the Woman's Cave. And guess what? I'm in it all by myself. Yeah, I had to do it announcer style because it feels real good. I got room to stretch out. Oh, wait. Room to stretch out. Woo! In a car, though, not in the studio. And no, I am not driving to Chicago this time. So I really don't know why I'm doing this in the car. I woke up this morning and had stuff to do. And then I thought I'd get it done by 10, and I didn't. So car it is. Look, there's a back seat that's empty and everything. That's so pathetically sad. Moving on, people. Let me remember to introduce myself. I'm Winona, and I normally have a Jade, but Jade isn't here today. She's getting a rental car because we're on our way down to Florida. Yeah. But anyway, not important. We wrote books, people. Books. Imagine that. An author that wrote books. We have the And I Thought series, which is And I Thought Divorce Was Bad. And I thought being grown up was easy, and I thought I did my journey alone, and I thought I had it all figured out, and I thought he was the one, and then there's a bunch of other ones, so you guys know the ritual. Pick them up, Barnes & Noble or Amazon.com. We also have the Misfit Guide, a sassy sway that leaves crooked footprints, and the Misfit Guide's Cocktail Soirees and the LBD, my favorite book. Cocktail books with literary life guide poetry, and nonfiction. I'm going to mention nonfiction because we have a nonfiction person with us today. Hey, wink, wink. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. It just left the station without me. Train gone. Boom. By the way, we have audiobooks. So I just got my own audiobook out today. It's called Foreign Coffee, my first ever romance book I've ever written in the amount of years I've been writing. Oh, well. Also, check out Just Right in Life, the only docuseries about authors, which is one episode is still on Amazon. And if you're in Sacramento, catch a rerun of us because our cute little faces look better when they're younger. Imagine that. Me, younger, cuter. Whoop. Anyway, you're not here to hear about us. I feel like I'm missing something. There's no Jade to ask. No Jade to ask. So we're going to move straight ahead. You're not here to hear about me or the stupid things I do. So wonderful guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Brendan O'Mara, and I'm the host of CNF, the Creative Non-Fiction podcast, where I speak to badass writers and artists about the art and craft of telling true stories. And I'm also an assistant opinion page editor for the Register Guard newspaper here in Eugene, Oregon, and a freelancer and an author. So that's me in a couple sentences.
Wow. Okay, I'm going back to the newspaper in Oregon. Wow. How did you get that gig?
Well, I've been a journalist for the better part of 15 years, writing primarily features, covering sports, narrative features for various magazines. Nothing huge, but stuff I really love. Those sort of immersive, long form narrative profiles and the like. And a few years ago, my wife and I moved out to Oregon. We used to be on the East Coast, and I was piddling around here, freelancing, doing the podcast, of course, and to try to lock up something a bit more steady, which is always nice for a freelancer to have, is some steady income. And I was lucky enough to land a job with the newspaper in town. And so I handle a lot of letters to the editor, columns, and write the occasional editorials and everything. So that's my sort of steady gig through which I thread around a lot of my creative work and freelancing, features. And of course, the Creative Non-Fiction podcast, where I get to speak to just amazing people in the genre and kind of unpack their brains and their origin stories and how they go about the work so listeners can get a little bit better at what they do.
Okay, so at some point during this, fair warning, I am going to ask to be on your podcast. Just fair warning.
Okay? Hey, open door.
So, okay, you jumped from the East Coast to Eugene, Oregon.
That's right.
Isn't that like the same weather? I mean, they have California there. What were you thinking?
Oh, let me tell what's great about where Eugene is in Oregon. Now, Oregon is a gigantic state. It's probably 3 times the size of Pennsylvania. And where we are in Eugene, it's in the Willamette Valley. And what's great even in the winter, there's pretty much no snow. There might be one snowstorm a year, and it's kind of anomalous when that happens. But to, a 90-minute drive to the west, you're right on the ocean. 90 minutes east, you're into the, the Cascades and snow. But right where we are, it's pretty temperate. It's rainy. This is the rainy season now. From about November to May, it's pretty wet. But then from May to October, almost not a single drop of rain and no clouds in the sky. So this is a great access point, jumping off point, 2 hours to Portland. You can go, another hour, 2 hours, you'll get snow and then ocean to the other side. So it's a really great jumping off point to get everywhere. So it's actually pretty temperate where we are. So we're lucky in terms of the geography of where Eugene is.
That is amazing. I'm a little jealous, but then I remember that it's not like sunshiny and 75 degrees all year, so I'm not jealous. Not that.
Right.
But I am jealous about the no snow thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get to business. The Creative Non-Fiction podcast, how did that get started? I mean, other than obviously you're a journalist, so you want to know about more how other people tick, but how did you actually get started?
Yeah, so I started the show almost 8 years ago. And I started it because I was, at that time, speaking of snow, we were living in upstate New York, near Saratoga Springs, New York. Uh-huh. And so I'm freelancing there, and I was doing a lot of stuff just sort of by myself on just at my desk. My wife had her job, and I was just kind of alone in the house and doing a lot of, kind of a slideshow type stuff that it was a lot of churn and burn and not very enjoyable, and certainly not the kind of writing that I'm kind of passionate about and really wanted to do. And so, then I would kind of looking over my shoulder here and there and, comparing myself and getting kind of jealous with people my age or a little older and kind of getting a little bit bitter and resentful that I was kind of lonely and doing this kind of work. And, everyone else seemed to be winning and I was just kind of in the mud. And so I figured, you know what, nobody's knocking on my door to be having interviews, and I'm not getting on any podcast. So I figure, I'm like, you know what, why don't I start one to kind of work through these sort of toxic feelings of, jealousy and resentment and celebrate people's work instead of being kind of bitter and toxic. So I'm like, you know what, let's celebrate people's work. Let's get people on the show and unpack their process, how they go about the work. And in so doing, maybe build people up and maybe build me up and try to, bloodlet some of that toxic poison that was in my blood. And, and here we are, 7.5 years later, and the show is, picking up some steam, and it's come through, a lot of rigor and just showing up and having good conversations and listening and asking good questions and just trying to be a good literary citizen in the nonfiction storytelling world and, build something instead of tear it down. So that's kind of the ethos of the show and how it started from this kind of little sort of, a kind of a dark, lonely time and in a way to help appease a lot of loneliness I was feeling at the time as well.
I find that our darkest moments as writers is our best inspiration. I feel like, actors and everybody, they get to have that happy moment and then they get inspiration. I'm like, why do we have to go to the depths of despair? Wash up on the shore, half drown, and we're like, I got it. And it always turns out beautifully. That's not fair. You need to switch.
Exactly. And it was just kind of, and it was just from, it was just a bad mindset, and it's a horrible place to create from. And so that's just how I figure. I'm like, I can muscle my way through. I'm not inherently positive, so I kind of have to work on that. Mm-hmm. And so this was a way for me to really work on that and work on that muscle, and through constant repetition, and then really trying to see what's good in people's work and celebrate that. I think it's done me a world of good just as a person to do it, and I think it's helped the nonfiction storytelling community as well to be able to have these conversations and promote people's work. And then it's just it's a whole lot of fun to be able to talk to Susan Orlean or Jericho Brown and Laura Hillenbrand and Eli Saslow, Pulitzer Prize winners. I mean, I would have never imagined that such things were possible from where the show started.
I have to say that one of the reasons that I really wanted to interview you. So for our listeners, this is our third time trying to get this done. You know, like us on the road, you know, Winona and Jade on the road, and we're trying to do podcasts. It doesn't always work out, especially when you cross timelines. So this is our third time trying to get it done, but I wanted to stick with it because you interviewed Susan Orlean. Yes. I mean, there was you because you do Twice. A terrific podcast, but you also interviewed Susan Orlean, which is the only reason I've ever stayed with Creative Non-Fiction, and now I write articles on some really cool people. So anyway, yeah, that was one of the reasons. There was no question there, so let's get back to questions, huh?
Yeah. Well, you know, Susan is great. She's talk about someone who is a superstar in the genre. And even when I first had her on the show, I think it was episode 61, and she 61 or yeah 61, and you know, she had no. She could have easily said, no, you know, you're a nobody. You could do this, but she's just got such a big heart, and she's a great contributor to the genres on the whole. So it was great to, you know, it was great for her to do that and to come on the show and talk shop. And then so that was just kind of a random occurrence the first time, just because I admire her so much. And the second time she was on the show about a little over a year later. It was when the library book came out, you know, her latest book. And so we got to have another talk about that. So I'd like to think that, you know, she'll be on again, at, you know, maybe sometime in the next year, since that book's out in paperback, and we can always dig in to new things every time.
Exactly. That, how amazing do you feel like when you meet someone and you fangirl, not fangirl. You were a fan boy? Is it fanboy or fan guy?
Good question. I'd say like maybe nerding out might be a good way.
Okay, yeah. So how do you handle those interviews?
Well, for one, I tend to get real nervous before most interviews, and especially when I'm dealing with someone of that stature. Laura Hillenbrand, Susan Orlean, Debbie Millman. You know, these people who I admire so much for the work they do, and also because they tend to do a lot of these kind of interviews over the years, so they have a lot of experience being interviewed, and they tend to, you know, you want to be a good host, not just, you know, and almost like the way you would be a good host if people are coming over your house. You want to make sure that they are, you know, that they have the beverages they want and the snacks they need, and that they're happy. And so I really fret about the experience that they're having on the show. So I'm always trying to, I really fret over the kinds of questions I'm going to ask them, and not just ask the ones that are going to be your typical, maybe local television 5-minute interview where everything's pretty superficial. So I'm trying to get to a deeper level, something I like to call like breaking through the first levels. And, you know, breaking through the, you know, if there's whatever comes to mind first is usually kind of cliche. So you want to try to burrow deep, get the jackhammer out and go deeper. So I'm always kind of, all right, I want to ask questions that challenge them in a way that they haven't been challenged in a while. And that's always a challenge, because you want to make them have a good experience. And when they've had multiple experiences being interviewed, that becomes the, I keep repeating challenge, but that becomes the challenge, and why I get kind of nervous. But I find the more nervous I am, that means I have to do a little more research, or a lot of research, and a lot more reading, dig into the past interviews they've done, and maybe pull out a quote that they've said from something maybe 5 years ago, and read it back to them and be like, well, what do you make of this? And kind of go through that. I kind of liken it to, my nerves tend to settle down once I'm kind of in the pocket of the interview. Kind of like a quarterback in the pocket. You know, they watch a lot of film, and they're reading defenses, and the more film, the more study you do, the more you can see, and the more options are there for you. And then as the interview unfolds, the pocket forms, and I'm kind of in it, and then I'm reading it, I'm listening to what they're saying. If I've done my research and my notes are kind of all over the place, they say a certain thing and it kind of points me in a different direction. So in a lot of ways, the guest is kind of guiding the conversation more than I am. But if I've done my work, I know I can go into various directions that they're unknowingly dictating. So it's but that's kind of how I work through it. If I'm nervous, it means, oh, Brendan, you need to do more research.
Exactly. I want to tell you, I've never been interviewed by you, but I want to say thank you so much for doing that kind of work, for finding that quote, for putting in that, because I'm going to do a little bragging here. I am the 18th most interviewed author in the world right now.
Holy crap. That's amazing.
Almost 800 interviews under our belts, and we sincerely appreciate people who don't ask the same question over and over again. Because honestly, at some point, you just check out. You're just like, oh, okay, that's what they asked. And you already know the answer by rote. You don't even have to think about it. It's embedded in your head. It's almost like writing your signature.
Exactly.
Like, got that. So
yes.
I thank you. That makes it interesting.
Exactly.
But I'm wondering. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. That's just to your point. Like, you've been like when we get to turn the cameras around and have you on the CNF, I'll be doing, several hours worth of reading on your work, and I'll be able to tease certain things out, and that's the hope. There's always something. I think Cheryl Stray talks about sort of like the subterranean river. That's where the good questions are, not on the surface of the prose per se, but what's really bubbling underneath it. And that's where the real good conversations come from, and benefits the guest, of course, and the listeners are going to get a lot more out of it.
Because you definitely need to know how to get in the mindset to create things that are beautiful, especially if you don't know, if you're beginning, where to start, where's your spring, where's your geyser of creativity. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, does the fact that you do literary profile pieces, like narrative profile pieces, help? Did it prepare you for this?
Oh, for sure. Sometimes it helps because being kind of in the game, I know the struggle too. So I know the grind. I know what it's like to, have the phone hung up on me from a disgruntled source for a show, for a profile, or and talking to people and asking sometimes uncomfortable questions to build a scene. Some people might not want to relive traumatic moments, but then again, sometimes they do. They want to feel heard and seen. And the fact that you have to have the courage to unpack some things and maybe, pick at a scar that hasn't been picked at in a while. It's kind of a gross image, but it is kind of what you're doing, if someone's dealt with something that's really painful and traumatic. But that said, doing that kind of work means I can ask that of, a narrative journalist on the show and be like, well, when you were talking to this person about this really traumatic event, like how hard was it for you to even ask that question? There are a lot of people out there who might be timid or don't want to offend or step on toes, or they don't want to open that wound again. But the fact is, that's kind of where the narrative is. So that's kind of the transaction too, is that as we unpack this thing, we know we have to get to the real core of what matters. And it might kind of sting a bit, but that's where it is. And we want to, unpack that as best we can. So if I'm in the game, then I have a bit more authority to ask these questions of people. Problem is sometimes with day job, and then of course the podcast being what it is, it's a big time commitment. So it's sometimes hard to be able to do the work with regularity. So sometimes I feel like I'm out of the game for a long time, and I'm asking these questions like, do I even deserve, or do I even get to ask these questions anymore? Because I'm just don't feel like I'm on the field. But the fact is, I've been on the field enough, and still on here and there, where I can still ask these questions and come from a place of experience and authority. But that certainly helps me get into the heads of the people doing this great work too.
So quickly, because we're way over time, who would be the interview that you would just be like, oh my word, this is the best. This is the top. It's never getting any better.
Let's see, one I've already done or one I'd like to do.
one you'd like to do, of course.
All right. Yeah. I definitely still have a big interview bucket list. John McPhee. He is my narrative journalism hero. He's probably about 90 years old at this point. So, of course, more time behind him than ahead. So there's urgency there if I can hopefully get him on the show. 1 degree of separation. So I do have sort of in. David Remnick, Roger Angel. Let's see. Ooh, those are 3. Those are big 3. There are lots of others, but I would say those are the big 3 on coming off the top of my mind.
Thank you so much. But first, I have to absolutely wrap this whole thing up. Where can people find you? Where can you listen to the Creative Non-Fiction podcast and read your work?
Very nice. Well, this was such a pleasure. I'm so glad we got to do this. Thank you so much for your time and the work you're doing. And open door. If you ever want to chat again, you know how to find me.
All right. Where can people find the Creative Non-Fiction podcast?
At my website, brendanomera.com is where all the show notes are. And of course, you can find it, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts as well. So just about anywhere you can find your podcast, you'll be able to find CNF, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast.
Thank you, Brendan, for stopping by. You guys, please go by, check out the Creative Nonfiction podcast, add it to your list of things to listen to. It has been an immense help for me right now because, as you know, it's the time of year for the 25 hottest authors, artists, and advocates. Magazines start coming out, so guess who's writing nothing but narrative profile pieces right now? Me! And I have enjoyed listening to it to continue to give me inspiration because nonfiction ain't my fun house. That is not where I like to be. But hey, you gotta do it when you gotta do it. Okay, also, you guys, we have the Inspirational Women in Literature, Media, and Journalism Awards coming up on March 21st. And remember that everything that your lady is doing can be found at www.andwethought.com. When you go to andwethought.com, go to the second tab where it says ladies, go to the middle of the page, and you will find the charities that we proudly support. Also, please support them too. Time, resources, money, anything that you can think to give to a charity would be great. Also, on the 21st, we will be supporting the charity award. So I think that's it. There's no day to run off the checklist for me, so I'm gonna go with that's it. So remember that wisdom is all around you if you're open to finding it and accepting it. Love you guys from Winona, who's still not getting her nails done, but is hitting the road. So I'll probably get them done in Florida. And Jade, bye-bye, you guys.